Hello and welcome to the Introvert Experience. This is T. Lee, aka the Introvert Leader, and I have a very special guest today. I actually haven't had a guest interview in a while, so I'm really excited about this conversation. And this is somebody that I met actually at a summit. I was able to be a part of the Introvertpreneur Summit earlier this year, hosted by Tara Reid. Awesome summit. Got to make some really good connections with fellow introverts there. And this is one of those people. And I think she has an outstanding story. And what she's involved in, I'm very intrigued by, and it's something I haven't got to talk about on this show. So, with that said, I'd like to welcome Elly Hurst to the Introvert Experience. Elly, how you doing today?
I am good. I'm happy. It is bright outside and I'm excited to be here.
That is awesome. Well, it's bright where you are, and it's raining where I am. So we got the contrast going. So it's all good.
Just kidding.
Cool, cool. So, my first question, Elly, and this is what I always ask guests because I'm always curious about people. I like to just hear more about people. So, my first question for you is who is Elly Hurst? And tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
So I am Ellie. I'm a foodie. I am a travel enthusiast. I love Pilates. I'm also neurodivergent and an entrepreneur. I love my family and I consider myself a third culture kid. Um, but in a business context, I'm a communications and a systems specialist. And my claim to fame would be having that global perspective as kind of like a right hand for inclusive and kind of more passionate leaders. So I spoke a bit about how I help leaders get to the next level of visibility by using operations, systems, all of those creative things at the Introvertpreneur Summit. And we were both there. It was a great time. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how long have you been involved in that work? It's really interesting work.
So I have been a part of Elevated, which I founded for neurodivergent and cross-cultural leaders for about 2 years. But I have been doing this for about seven years total. Yeah.
That is,
Started corporate and then made my way to the entrepreneur scene.
that is awesome. That is awesome. So, Elly, do you consider yourself to be an introvert?
Yes. And all the things that I just said, I did not include that in there, but I kind of take um my introvert tendencies and the neurodivergent kind of tendencies, and they tend to overlap. So sometimes I'll say one and I won't say the other one because a lot of times they go hand in hand.
Got you. Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue because that's what I wanted to get into here. So, when you think of the word introvert, what do you think of? Like, I think it's interesting in society, there are different words that trigger different definitions or different thoughts. And so I'm always interested to hear from, especially fellow introverts, when they hear that word, what comes to mind when you think of yourself, when you think of just introverts in general? What does that word mean to you?
I think when a lot of people hear that you're introverted, probably not so much anymore. It's not as negative anymore, but when you say you're introverted, they're like, "Oh, you're quiet. Oh, you're like socially awkward." But I don't really think that. A lot of times when I meet people for the first time, they're like, "Oh, you're so outgoing. Oh, you're so energetic. You're so social." And I'm like, maybe not, but also maybe yes. I think that being an introvert, you can be a great leader, you can be charismatic, you can be a social butterfly, all of the amazing great things you can be that. It's just we need a little bit more time to recoup after being our social butterflies. And also, I feel like being an introvert makes you a great listener.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't you find it interesting that what people assume introversion to be, they can just be so off. It's just, for me, it's interesting that with all the research that's been done, and I feel like there are more conversations starting to happen around introversion and extroversion. When you described about being a social butterfly, it's funny because I was having a conversation with someone a few weeks ago in a part of a book club I spoke to, and they had a very similar, they talked about being at a party and how they love to dance. And they're usually one of the first people to actually get on the dance floor and dance, and people come around them and all that. But they're actually an introvert, and no one that they meet thinks that. I just so you saying that it reminded me of that. But I think we can be so many different things, right? So it's interesting to hear you say that. So okay, so now the question that I've really been wanting to ask you here. Okay, neurodivergence. And I was excited when I saw we were going to have this conversation because I was actually talking to a coworker about this a few weeks ago because they let me know, well, Terrence, I'm neurodivergent. And we had a little conversation about it, but didn't get to dig as deep as, I really wanted to. So I would love for you to explain to, me and the listeners, what does it mean to be neurodivergent? What is it? And just give some background on that.
So that is a really wide umbrella, neurodivergence. But I am glad that it's being talked about more right now as well. And it's like a hot topic in lots of places, LinkedIn, all of those things. But basically, if you're neurodivergent, you're just a little bit different from the mainstream. Maybe your brain works a little bit different. There's lots of things that can fall under neurodivergence. It can include people living with depression, people living with anxiety, people living with ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, autism. There's a wide range of things that fall under neurodivergence.
Okay, interesting. So it's like a blanket umbrella in a way, and then there are several categories within that.
Yes, and you can have more than one box checked off. Like I personally am autistic, but I also have ADHD. But whenever I'm like, I fall on the autism spectrum, I have ADHD, people are like, oh wait, really? And I'm like, yes, it's a spectrum. Most things are a spectrum. They don't present the same way for everyone.
Right. Wow. Okay, that is so interesting. So like, because when I think about introversion and extroversion, it's very similar. A lot of people look at it like, oh, introverts are way over here, extroverts are way over here. When in reality, we're just all somewhere on a spectrum or a scale, because you could have people that are more in the middle and they're like ambiverts. And it sounds like what you're saying with neurodiversion is there's also a spectrum and a scale.
Especially with ADHD and autism, that is a spectrum as well, because a lot of people who have ADHD tend to be like hyperactive, whereas on the autism scale, we can kind of get to those people who don't even speak, like that's like completely out of their range. Like it's a spectrum of like high energy and like similar symptoms. And then you can have both at the same time, which is interesting, which they just recently kind of discovered.
Wow. And it's just, gosh, this is interesting. Because like where you are on that spectrum and on that scale, it sounds like it can be just so different, right? Because like people that don't know any better, right? They'll hear a word like autism and they may have certain assumptions, right? And they may assume a person operates a certain way. And, I actually have a coworker. Now he has Asperger's, which I wasn't as familiar with, but he's literally probably the smartest person I've ever met. Like he's a genius. And, I've talked to him and, he's talked a little bit about it, but it's just always interesting to me. You hear these words and these definitions of things and people assume something about somebody, but then that may not be all the way true. So I think it's interesting, the way you describe that. So do you see any links with introversion and being neurodivergent? Like when you think of what an introvert is, and I mean, neurodivergent seems like such a huge umbrella. Like there's so many things under it. Are there some synergies between the two? Do you see some similarities between those two?
Neurodivergence is definitely a big umbrella, but there is definitely a link between introversion and neurodivergence. I went and I looked up some stats just for you.
Okay, awesome.
um, the National Cancer Institute, it says that most most introverts are around, like, if you look at the numbers, there's about 50% of the population who identify as introverts, whereas there's like about 20% who are diagnosed neurodivergence. But under that umbrella of introversion, there's probably a lot more people who are actually neurodivergent as well, who don't either get diagnosed or who don't even realize that they fall under that umbrella. Because you can be on the autism spectrum and it like not even show up. Again, I'm going back to autism because that's where I have experience, and you might not even know that you're on that spectrum at all. Because I guess for me as well, when I go out, people don't even click. When I say I'm autistic, they're like, oh, I have this like really backward or like not very much information on what autism is, and that entire spectrum. And for me, it's kind of like maybe an introvert might need 20% downtime. I probably need like 30% downtime, and if I don't get that time, then I end up making myself sick. I get really, really tired. So it's just like being an introvert on hard mode if I don't control it, for me. So there's definitely a link between the two. And especially in, I would say, corporate, a lot of people don't even like to say that they're introverts, don't like to come out with that. So I've met a lot of leaders, and I've worked with a lot of leaders as well, who, as soon as I start talking to them and helping them out, I realize that they either have ADD or ADHD. Like, they're super like go-getters, but like everything is all over the place, and maybe they lose things, or maybe you have that coworker who is chronically late, but they don't want to disrespect your time, but like maybe they just start to lose track of time. Like,
Yeah.
it drops, and then they kind of just like forget what they're doing. Or maybe that coworker who always leaves their glasses somewhere, can't find it. Those are little tiny signs of neurodivergence. It could be like a multitude of different things, but like, we think of it all as normal right now. We kind of go, oh, okay, Susan keeps losing her pen. That's normal. That's just Susan behavior. But when you work one-on-one with like a therapist, occupational therapist, they will see those signs and be able to link the dots for you. So a lot of people are probably neurodivergent, just undiagnosed.
Introverts are too quiet and too weak to lead. Have you ever heard this before? Well, my name is Terrence, and for years as an introvert, I didn't think I had what it took to be a leader. What I learned was being an introvert is my superpower. If you want to learn how to have success as an introvert, then go to quietvoicefearlessleader.com to learn more.
Wow. That's very insightful. And I'm just thinking, kind of going down the track and talking about autism, because I'll admit I don't know a lot about that as well. So now I'm more curious. With the scale being so wide in terms of, because now what I'm thinking about is people in leadership positions, right? You work with leaders, you're a leader yourself, and you're coaching them and talking to them. What is the, I guess, difference? So someone can essentially be a high functioning autistic person and be in leadership and do that effectively, it sounds like, right? So, and the reason I'm getting toward this is because I feel like, again, so many people put people into boxes with words, because for a lot of people, and maybe even some people listening, they might hear the word autistic and just assume, okay, well, this person can't be high functioning or this person suffers from these things. But what I'm hearing you say is that you can be a high functioning autistic person and be a leader in the corporate world and do very well. I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, 100%. I 100% agree with that on all the levels that you can agree with that. I know you were talking about the person that you know that had Asperger's and they have this really high IQ. Well, when I was diagnosed as autistic ADHD when I was much younger, I also had my IQ test done, and I have above average IQ. So like, while I'm a little bit slower in certain things, I tend to catch up really quickly, and I tend to have like a really quick learning curve for all of those things. So if you just meet me out in the wild, you wouldn't be able to tell. Most people aren't. And then I guess I can share for my mother as well, who is a wildly successful leader. She's a diplomat, traveled for decades, all of that great stuff, but she's also on the autism spectrum. And nobody can tell. And they're like, oh, she's such a great speaker, she's such a great leader. And she's like, and then when we come home, she's like, yeah, autistic, introvert, oh, yeah, all of those things. But like, when I go out, it doesn't present that way.
Wow. I will tell you, this is so powerful. One of the reasons that I wanted to start doing the introvert leader and kind of talking about what I talk about is because I feel like a lot of people have perceptions about introverts, and they think introverts are quiet or weak or can't lead, and we're like the quiet people in the corner that, you know, don't want to do things. And so that's why, you know, I really wanted to start my platform and why I do this show. And so it's very powerful, I feel like, to hear what you're saying, because I think you're saying the same thing for people that are neurodivergent or people that are autistic. And it's a message that so many people need to hear, I feel like, because again, there are these boxes, and if we as a society can learn to just not place people in these boxes, and yeah, somebody may be autistic, they may be an introvert, but it may not mean what you think it means. That person may be the best speaker in the room. That person may be the best leader in the room, you know? So I think it's very powerful what you're saying. And yeah, you've given me a lot to think about too, because like I said, I didn't think I knew a lot about what neurodivergence or autism really meant myself. So yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So I guess my last question for you, Elly, when you think about strengths, I like to highlight the strengths of introverts and things that can help an introvert stand out in the corporate world or stand out in leadership, things that society may deem to be negatives, but we can actually use to our advantage. When you think about being neurodivergent, when you think about being autistic, what are some unique strengths you might think, or some things that someone that's on that spectrum would have as an advantage that someone else may not have?
So these are definitely strengths that I play up for everyone that I work with, whether you're neurodivergent or you're an introvert or you're maybe a third culture kid, which I don't think I dove into this, but like third culture kid is when, you know, you have parents, different cultures, and then maybe you live in a different culture or you move to a different place and you have 3 or more cultures going on. So with all of that diversity, I tend to emphasize thought diversity, because whether it's your gender, race, culture, your brain, neurodiversity, any of those types of diversity, I think that the way you think is kind of affected. You're able to see things from a different perspective, and you're able to bring something new to the table. And that's really important in corporate. It's really important in any setting. If you want to thrive, if you want innovation to like spark, you have to have that diversity. So I focus on being authentic and bringing in what makes you unique, what makes you different to the table. So for a lot of introverts, maybe in like board meetings, we might not be the ones to like raise our hands and be like, hey, I have this point to make. But usually when we do have a point to make, it's a well thought out point and it has like backing and it has credibility and all of that good stuff. So I tend to focus on that and say, go with what makes you authentic and go with what makes you unique. And I think it's really important for workspaces, whether it's in corporate or small businesses, that we kind of nurture that diversity in all its forms, which is why I kind of go for that thought diversity instead of any other specific diversity. But highlight what makes you unique because it's what kind of brings about change and new and good and great things.
Awesome. That is a great answer. And I love that thought diversity. I love that. Just having different thoughts, different opinions. I think that's more of what we need. So awesome. Thank you for that answer. Well, Elly, why don't you tell the people where they can follow you or get in touch with you? Because again, I think that your message is very powerful and it's needed. I don't see enough people talking about this. I'm pretty excited just for this conversation and who's going to hear this. I feel like I've got some listeners that are going to hear this and it's really going to resonate. They're going to say, wait a minute, am I neurodivergent? Or like, I'm sure they heard something that really resonated with them. So, where can people follow you and get in touch with you?
So I like to be quirky, and I thought it was really, really quirky and funny when I was making up my business name. So you can find me at ellyvated.com, and that's ELLYVATED, because I thought it was funny. And then that same platform, if you wanted to join my newsletter or you wanted to look into any of the free resources that I have, you can go to elevated.com/scale, SCALE. And I have a kind of like a quick start guide to help you lead uniquely and on your own terms. Free just for you listeners. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I am Elly Hurst, and on Facebook at Elly Hurst.
Awesome. Well, we will have all that information in the show notes, so make sure you go follow and support Elly and this amazing message that she's got. So with that said, Elly, I have really appreciated having you on. This has been an awesome conversation.
It's been great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation, and I hope that we do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right. And for everyone listening, remember, as always, there's only one you and there's only one life. So make it count. God bless.